a guy who prepares a lot because he is a professor of sports biomechanics at St. Francis Xavier University and the co-developer of the stack system, which everyone is using to get faster. Dr. Sasha McKenzie joining us live on the show.
All right.
All right, we're back. Dr. Sasha McKenzie. So I was looking at your bio. We've chatted before in the past. It's been a little while. It says you are like are you a coach to coaches? Is that a fair sort of description for what you do?
I think so, based on the last number of conversations I've had about tour players the last few weeks. Yeah, I think so. I've talked to a lot of coaches about their players. Yeah.
So what exactly, like, how would you, a sports biomechanist, how would you describe your work? What are the conversations that you have most often with coaches?
Well, I think usually it starts with the coach having a theory. You know, it's a big deal to change a player's mechanics. So if a player is struggling, the coach has a theory about how they can improve it, and usually they run that theory by me to make sure that it it makes sense, that it's it's not made up. They're not guessing. It's grounded in some research.
And so, what do you think has been your biggest discovery, like in golf? What? Because obviously, your name comes up all the time in conversation with these coaches. They consult with you. What is the piece of information or sort of approach that turns on the light bulb for these coaches?
It's well, everything from putting to speed, but probably the biggest one has to do with a kind of a complex understanding of how the face squares in the golf swing. There's the ability to get, not to go too technical, Dan.
No, go technical. Go super technical. That's why we have you on.
Okay, so it's there's a concept that I figured out during my PhD. It's kind of a very abstract way to square the face, where the center of mass of the golf club gets below the force that the golfer is applying in the downswing. I saw it doing some modeling work, forward dynamics modeling. I have a 3D model of a golfer that can simulate certain things. That was the start of it during my PhD thesis. But then when I started to work with players and get data collected by lots of different systems, including in my own lab, and you can see that the best players, when they're playing their best, they have this mechanism, and certainly high handicappers do not. And then there's been lots of case studies where I've worked with tour players where they've kind of lost their swing. They just don't have that feeling, like, the club is being slotted. They don't really know whether the face is going to be slightly open or slightly closed, not a comfortable feeling. And I've worked through that with a few players to help them kind of get back in the groove.
Tell me about developing the stack system. I remember when Fitzy won the U.S. Open, that was that put it, sort of on the map big time. But tell me about the development of that program and what the sort of core principles are for helping people gain speed.
Yeah, as a biomechanist, my first approach working with tour players to get speed was to change their mechanics. But kind of drawing on my track and field background, realized that training has to be part of that, and while you're doing the physical training, overload, overspeed training, you're working on those swing mechanics. And so that's the stack system in a nutshell. It's some hardware that allows you to swing things slightly faster than your driver, swing things slightly heavier than your driver, and pairs with an app that provides custom programming, right? So it allows me to work remotely with someone like Fitzpatrick, someone who had the potential, but maybe wasn't necessarily doing the right stuff in the gym, putting in the time, but not really seeing it translate to increased speed on the course. And we had a great, still going. He had the, longest drive and number 2 on Sunday at the PGA Championship, right? I think he had 184 ball speed on that one. So that's keeping him competitive to win majors. So it's a great product.
Are you the USGA's like worst enemy when it comes to the distance?
I feel like, yeah, maybe. Well, I feel like I could be a guiding light based on some of their premises. I feel like personally, from the stack system perspective, roll the ball back. Everybody's going to need the stack system. But I think it's not the way to go. Aside from helping my business with the necessity of gaining speed, I don't think it's going to accomplish what they want to accomplish by slowing the ball down.
Because of your analysis of like the physics of how it will actually happen, or why do you say that?
Well, they're basing it on current data and making some false assumptions. So you would look at tour average clubhead speed, 115, 116, and they go, right, well, we could see this increasing to 120. And if we slow the ball down, then we're all good. It took us 10 years to go, to get 4 miles an hour faster. This is probably will reach the limit. They're missing the fact that fast is 160 mile an hour clubhead speed. So there are hundreds of really good golfers who can swing the club at 130 plus. Tony Finau is an example of overnight. If you slowed the ball down to a squash ball, he'd tee it up in the first tee and swing at 140. Bryson's already there. So you're going to weed out all the Brian Harmons. We're not going to see them. What's currently limiting the clubhead speeds we see that are contributing to the averages is predominantly course setup and golfers trying to maximize. So you're saying
these guys have way more, like I was actually just talking about this because I've been doing a lot of stuff with college golf, and those kids swing out of their shoes. So you think if the courses were less penal, these guys, the speeds would go up overnight.
Overnight, instantaneously. So there would be probably 20 guys on tour that would just go from 180 ball speed to, depending on how they slow the ball down. But let's say from 120 clubhead speed to 125. Guys would go from 125 to 130. It would be overnight because, that cone of dispersion, if you slow the ball down, that means that, okay, now we're back here in the fairway, right? So now I can just swing harder and have the ball go to the same places. You look at some really, I think, great courses, TPC Sawgrass, you have guys hitting driver off the tee, you have guys hitting on the same tee, hybrid. Balls are going in the same position. Harmon's hitting a driver, Schauffele's hitting a hybrid. All of a sudden, you slow the ball down. Brian Harmon's not even there to hit a driver. Schauffele's hitting his driver. And all these young kids coming up are hitting their driver. And you're going to have basically the PGA Tour self-selecting for folks that can swing at 130. That's what's going to happen. It's so the limiting factor on clubhead speed right now is maximizing strokes gain. You slow the ball down in order to maximize strokes gain, you're going to need more clubhead speed. And there's guys that are just waiting to do that.
I wanted to ask you about a few specific golf swings. Bryson DeChambeau, he's super long, but he does it in kind of a different way. It's not a crazy amount of lag. And I was watching, what's the young kid? Blades Brown. He kind of swings it similarly. What do you make of those kind of? Those are almost more like golf, the golfing machine. Are you like familiar with those all those principles?
Yeah, I'm very, very familiar with the golfing machine. Don't really espouse to it too much. And I don't think anything that's working for Bryson would be despite, his early concepts of applying the golfing machine to his swing. I think maybe he doesn't have a ton of lag at the wrist, but he's got amazing stretches at all the other joints in transition. His transition sequence, in addition to all the fast twitch and his ability, his muscular ability, but from a mechanic standpoint, his transition sequence is amazing as far as I'm concerned. That's what separates him. All
right, Michael Lasasso. So this kid just won the national championship individual, and this golf swing is really something. When it feels like kind of the extreme example of like the Joaquin Nemans sort of side bend, but there's a pause in there. What do you make of this from a biomechanical standpoint?
Yeah, kid has a ton of fast twitch. So he can have that pause. You can get into some maybe non-classic positions, but if your muscles can contract crazy fast at high speeds, driver's not very heavy, you can generate very high clubhead speeds. I don't see anything wrong with it.
I guess my question is sort of like, with what a lot of work that you do, and Brandel's been talking a lot about this, about like these golf swings, it's going to be like a more steep peak, that it's a shorter peak for these careers, because he feels like, or he said that, they're putting a lot of stress on their bodies, and maybe that's what the game goes to, right? Like football players have a short career, and they, if they damage their body, but they make money in the process, that's part of it. Do you buy that? I mean, we saw Will Zalatoris, he's really struggling with back injuries. Are these injuries sort of inevitable? Are there going to be more golfer injuries, I guess is a long way of asking that question.
Yeah, I don't think so. No, I don't believe that that's the case. I believe predicting injury is with athletes is nearly impossible, especially elite athletes, where the reason why they're there is because their bodies aren't like, everybody else's. They can do really freakish things. I look at Will Zalatoris, and you might say, well, arguably he's changed his swing to, safeguard against back issues. And even though he changed his swing a little bit, hey, that's, he's maybe even done more damage than or just as much damage as when he was swinging a little differently. But I would look at what kinds of ranges of motion can the golfer get into passively or actively outside the golf swing. So maybe walking Niemann can turn himself into a pretzel. So the stresses that he's going to experience on his body swinging that way, aren't really that big of a deal. But I agree with you. At the elite level, there is going to be some trade-off. It might not be because of the mechanics, but simply because of the high number of reps. If we go to a sport where you're kind of really safeguarding against injury, pitching in American baseball, those guys get down to the pitch count. They like come the end of the week, they're like, all right, how many pitches have you taken? Stop. And even number of pitches of a certain type. Golfers, it was awesome at the Masters seeing the number of shots they were taking on the range. That was fantastic. You could never see athletes in a lot of other sports take those number of repetitions. Long drive guys, thousands of swings a week, but we don't see them necessarily getting super injured all the time compared to other sports. So it's a nice talking point, but I don't think there's anything we can predict based on how a golfer looks, especially when there are lots of NCAA athletes in basketball, volleyball, track and field where after they do their competition, they are sore, they feel beat up. A lot of these golfers, I bet you walking Nemans probably woke up, jumped out of bed every day, and never thought twice about his back.
He told me, I asked him this question. I did a video caddying for him. He's like, I've never had a single back issue in my entire career. Like I've never had any pain or anything.
Yeah, ask an NCAA Division I volleyball player how their knees feel. I bet you they probably can't sit in a plane for 2 hours without being in excruciating pain. So. Yeah, I'm not too concerned about what might be perceived as odd mechanics that could or maybe or will lead to an injury in golf.
My last question for you, I want to leave our listeners and our viewers with something. If you could give one piece of advice, I know beyond start the stack system, they go to the gym. What should they be working on? What should they be targeting with their bodies to try to get better at golf?
Yeah, I think mobility for most people is up there, but you do need so there's tons of great stuff on the internet. We've got a great warm-up in the stack system, but I think mobility for a lot of people, but you need a minimum level of strength as well. So I've got no problem with someone doing deadlifts or pull-ups to be able to, develop a base level of strength. If you're looking to golf your best or golf your longest, that's going to be the way to do it. Stay strong, stay mobile. I wouldn't worry too much about cardio.
Yeah, I'm in that boat. I did a disc in my back in September of last year, and I went into physical, and they were like, the only way to get this better is to get strong. And so I've been powerlifting, and I haven't had any issues. You create like a strong base around your quads, glutes, abs, core, and the back issues kind of melt away.
Hips and shoulders are massive, and usually if you're trying to work on hip mobility, the lower back is getting worked as well. But two joints, anything you do to help you improve your hip mobility and shoulder mobility, and throw a little bit of strength in there with some squats, deadlifts, pull-ups.
Nothing new under the sun. You know what I mean? Just classic stuff.
No. Classic stuff. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Sasha McKenzie. We've really enjoyed having you on the show. We'll do this again sometime soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, Dan.